Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people around the world. Now, how can I make the categorical statement that all the thousands and maybe tens of thousands of people that eventually see this are all good-looking? Because by definition, if you tuned into the marriage webinar with our distinguished panel and your humble host, Barry Shore, that means you're always looking for and finding the good. That's a definition of a good looking person, always looking for and finding the good, no matter the circumstances. And as we say, in today's world, there are circumstances. So without further ado, what I'm going to do, as you know, this is the marriage webinar. We've been doing this, thank God, for a couple of years. Many thousands of people have been positively affected by it. Some who have been adversely affected for it don't listen anymore, so it doesn't matter. But those who are positively affected by it tune in regularly because they want to hear from people who are on the leading edge of what's happening and thinking about these issues. Again, our distinguished panel. And today is an issue that is potentially could cause a shift in the American political scene, the American landscape. And whatever happens in America reverberates throughout the world. So this is extremely important. And we are so au courant. I'm going to say the date. Today is the 27th of the month of October in the year called 2021. And I say it particularly because we are on the heel or the edge of an election in the state of Virginia. And one of our panelists is from the state of Virginia. So she's ground zero. She's going to be our point person for this. And what happens in the election for the governorship of Virginia could set the tone for the next 2 years of American life. And it will be very interesting to see what happens on November the 2nd, I think it is, Hami. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our distinguished panel. And I said up in the upper right-hand corner, weighing in at, well, again, we don't do that. The amazing, the wonderful, fabulous Lori McDermott, the wife expert. And as you see, that's her website. And I urge everybody to go visit because you will learn much from Lori McDermott through her experience, both as her being as a victor, not a victim, and how she translates that for other wives and families, and how she's been a healer for many, many people and bringing benefit to the world. In the lower right-hand corner is amazing, wonderful, fabulous Maura Sweeney, dubbed by the United Nations as the ambassador of happiness, right? That's you.
Organizations did that for me. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And if the UN says it, it must be true, even though we don't trust them for anything. But that's another story. But for this, we will. And so Lori is in Manhattan Beach, California. Maura is in southern Florida, and in Virginia. Norfolk, Virginia, actually, a naval base, but also the home of one of the greatest Jewish communities in America. Maybe small, maybe fledgling, but it is powerful because its force emanates throughout the country. Oh, the world, actually. And that is wonderful Hami Haber. Wonderful Hami, welcome. Hami is, in addition to being a teacher, a coach, a mother, a wonderful wife, she is a confidant to many people in the community of educators, especially in the Jewish world. And so that's why I think it's especially important today, but we're going to focus everything we talk about upon education. Matter of fact, the title of our discussion today is, who is in charge of your child's education? And then, of course, that's why this is the marriage webinar. It's under our umbrella, our tent, because every one of us is married with a child or children. And we recognize that we're not here just for the immediate moment, but we're here for eternity. Matter of fact, LIFE is a great acronym that stands for Living Inspirationally for Eternity. And that is translated into the persona of children. So it's really important, if not vital, I think I'll use the word vital, to understand the process of educating children and who is responsible. Now, I take this from I believe, a misstep and a misstatement by one of the two people vying for the governorship of the state of Virginia. And by him stating something that he really believes to be true, that's the problem, but he believes to be true, he set off a firestorm of controversy, or in England they say controversy for those of you listening overseas, regarding the issue of who is in charge of our child's education. And without quoting him exactly, actually, I may even have the quote. Bear with me if I can find it very quickly. And I did have it poised to bring up. So, yes, Mr. Shore, where did you put that? Well, you put it someplace, and I'm sure you could find it if you were a little more prepared. But here it is. Ta-da! The quote. I quote. The person's name, I won't give him benefit, but he goes under the name of Terry McAuliffe. And he said in a debate, a public debate, this is his statement, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach, close quote. The amazing thing of it, by the way, was that given the opportunity to say, I didn't say it, I back down. In today's environment, this has happened many times over the past number of years, whether to be Republican or Democrat. People double down, as they say. He doubled down. He quadrupled down by bringing in outside forces to back up him and say, yes, parents shouldn't be saying this. So my question, we're going to start off with a question. Actually, I'm going to pose a statement, and then we're going to start with I want input from our distinguished panel of just your thoughts, just general thoughts on the following. This is a line from a dear friend of mine. His name is Jonathan Rosenblum. He writes a great column every once in a while. I wish he wrote more often, but he wrote a line that's the following. You ready for this? How did soccer moms morph into domestic terrorists bent on mass destruction? I mean, we're talking about soccer moms. How did they morph into domestic terrorists, which, by the way, is a term that the FBI has been issued by the Attorney General of the United States of America to investigate. So we're going to start with, let's start with Maura. Maura, are your feathers ruffled by any of these statements?
I texted Lori the other day, I think it was yesterday, telling her I had been so involved doing research, trying to get some answers specifically about the domestic terrorist issue. This is really shocking, I think, to many people, but maybe some are not so shocked by it. Where do I want to start? I probably want to say something about myself. I have always, my entire life, sought to bring people of different persuasions together. The way we work out situations is we give people a voice, we hear people's concerns, everyone comes around a table, and then we say, what is the big goal here? What is it that we're seeking? What is the good that we're looking for? And then we end up with a quorum of people, we end up with collaboration, and we end up with a vision moving forward. So I say that as a way of maybe a preamble to everything. Beyond that, to say that it's very surprising for the first time to hear parents referred to as potential domestic terrorists. Should I say to you, what's the question? I could let you know. I've been on the phone with the FBI, the Department of Justice. I have written to boards of education in 3 counties nearby. And the interesting thing is, while I was trying to zero in and find out exactly what's going on now with the status of parents, no one is willing from the federal government to give a specific response. It's very interesting. So I think it's got some parents extremely upset, worried about speaking aloud, and yet from a federal standpoint, I have not been able to get any specific directive or codifying words to say, yes, we now have a portal for people to report parents. And I think it's a tough place to start, Barry, but I'm always from the other side of the point. Where do we bring people together and find ways that we could work together?
So let me unpack something here you said, Maura, because I think it's very important to begin with you, what your perspective was. is, and using the word collaboration, because it is, for want of a better term, the cornerstone of the American process, the democratic republic process. In other words, what's the whole idea of a school board meeting? I mean, talk about vanilla, talk about bland, talk about G. And all of a sudden, and I mean literally, it's all of a sudden, something has happened. And I think it was triggered by COVID, let's be blunt, and we'll go there for a bit. But to even think of bringing in the FBI, here's where I find the difficulty. School boards are local constituents by definition. They're not necessarily, they may be county, maybe city. They're not even state regulated. They're certainly not under the purview of the federal government. The FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So what happens at a school board meeting, unless, of course, some people go crazy on either side, whether it's the school board members or the parents, use firearms or threaten immediate violence and such, who cares if people shout and yell and scream? Hello, it's like family at home. No offense. We're talking about marriage. But the point is that is the process by which I always believed meetings should be held. When I was growing up, I'm older than everybody here. So I grew up in a town called Brookline, Massachusetts. Brookline is a town. So towns have certain bylaws, you have selectmen and this and that, and people are always going to meetings. That's just the way it is in a town. 50,000 people, you go to a town meeting, and sometimes they get rowdy, and most of the time they're bland, they're boring. But when it's rowdy, so big deal. Now, what's been happening because of COVID, I think exacerbated tensions, because what people who were going to school board meetings saw was that the school board was mandating certain processes vis-a-vis kids. Of course, teachers also say vaccine, mask, whatever it was, that they were mandating from where they sat in their big chairs behind the credenza, far away from whoever spoke. And all of a sudden, the tensions rose higher. And then you had something that maybe Hami will talk to us about what happened in Loudoun County. It literally was a spark, much like the Boston Tea Party. Things went overboard, excuse the pun. So I just want to mention again, yes, collaboration is the necessary practice in our world. That is what America is about. Without it, you don't have what we call a democratic republic. You can have a geographic country, but you will not have an active democratic republic, and we're not ready yet to give up on the ideal. I think most people are coming to realization that we may have been quiet too long. I say we, I'm not partisan. I'm saying that people may have been quiet too long and acquiesced and said, well, gee, whatever happens in school happens, presuming that the values in school were the same as the values at home. That was the presumption, right? And now come to find, and now we're being told by a person running for governor, well, you don't have any say in what's being taught at school, parent. So it's apparent that something's wrong. So thank you, by the way, Mara, for doing the research. We're going to go to Lori, and we're going to come back again because we want to hear more. Lori, your thoughts, please, because you have 3 kids, various ages, various parts of schools, and you're in Manhattan Beach, which is bedrock of insanity. I mean, liberalism.
I hide. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm very open to opinions and thoughts, and I'm not a person that says it has to be done this way. I'm very flexible. But I will say, you spoke about soccer moms. I had all my kids play soccer. I was never a soccer mom. I would never be a soccer mom. Those people scared me.
In other words, you're not a helicopter person, right? Right.
No, I'm very flexible. But if I have something I'm really angry about, I don't talk about it with 80 other people. I go straight to the soccer coach. He and I will have a dialogue, and
Right.
I will solve it, and we will fix it. And those people scare me. So I just wanted to say that. But what you just said now, it's almost like when this whole thing happened, it's as if we ripped off the Band-Aid of what school was, and we got to see all the pores. And you're right, families are like, we're all different in my home. In my home, we're Catholic. So we teach Catholic religion. We teach the rules. I grew up, my husband grew up, he grew up in a family, I grew up in a family. He had rules, I had rules. We had to combine that. That's what we teach our kids. God forbid they leave our house and go to school and learn something completely different and then bring that home. It's fine if it's all the stuff, the ABCs that we know where they're supposed to, there's a book, they're supposed to go through it from September through June, they have to accomplish the whole thing in this book. Otherwise, everyone falls apart. But now there's all these other things they're trying to intertwine in it. And we as parents, that's not okay. This critical race theory everyone's talking about, that white people are terrible. Like, what are you talking about? It's almost like reverse racism. And if we're trying to get rid of racism, why are we doing that? That doesn't make any sense. So to answer, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but the whole thing drives me insane. And I have very little power. Maura was just talking about making phone calls to places. I'll tell you, this morning, I made 2 calls to book 2 appointments for doctor visits for my kids. It took about 3 hours. There is no way to call someone and have them go, hello. It's like you get a voicemail every time. And it's so hard to get something done. And that's why, I mean, forgive me, I loved that about Trump. All the things I didn't like about him, I love that about him because he just would get stuff done. And it's so hard to get stuff done. So all these people might be sitting there saying, on the areas that we're talking about, saying, I do want change, but I'm sitting on a board with 5. There was, in my school here, there was, I forget how many board members, but several of them were going towards the position that we all feel like it should be a parent's choice. I should have some.
Let's just focus on that. So from your perspective, you as a parent, you and your husband as well, you do have a voice in what the school teaches. Is that correct?
I think so. Absolutely. We have, like, if you think about, you sit down with here's all the classes your child can take in high school. We choose them based on what we think our daughter can handle right now. I didn't add in all this other stuff. I didn't add in her political views, or that's not something we discuss. We don't discuss religion or politics in a conversation at the dinner table with strangers. You just don't do that. And why are we doing that now?
Very good. I like the analogy or the idea of ripping off the bandage. Ow! Yes, but that's what's happening. And I think that what we're seeing is, everybody knows what a martinet is. So a martinet is a fancy term for a drill master. And you tend to see that, I'm going to tell a story. Kami, you might relate to this a little bit. I first saw this in religious Jewish schools, interestingly enough, where you had the kids are there in the morning and they're in prayer. And, you talk about kids, what do they really know? So they emulate what their parents do. They move around, they do things like that. And you have one of the teachers is go through the kids and just trying to make sure that they're actually doing something rather than just standing there mumbling. And unfortunately, the teacher has to take on the role of a martinet, of a sort of a drill sergeant. And it's a difficult situation because you want to be gentle and yet you have to be tough. What's happened is that the school board members have become our martinets. In other words, you need to march in time to what we say. You don't know what's going on in education today. Who are you? You're just a parent. I mean, this is an attitude that, from my perspective, is not acceptable. Now, let's hear from Kami, who actually crosses over, use the interesting term, crossover, several different disciplines, because Kami is living in Virginia, which is the battleground state at the moment. You realize that? The same thing as what happened in the Civil War. So she's in the battleground state. She's not in Richmond, but she's in Norfolk. Virginia tends to be a left-leaning state, and much more so over the past 10, 20 years than it was even previous. And I'd like to get a feel from you, Hami, what you're sensing, because at one and the same time, you and your husband run a school. I don't know how many kids in it, but it's a religious school, parochial school. In this case, parochial Jewish. So what are you seeing vis-a-vis the election and vis-a-vis the involvement of parents in curriculum? Do parents have a say in your school?
I don't want to get in trouble here. I first want to say, I remember very clearly when I was in 6th grade, there was some issue that came up where the Jewish community, I was in Canada at the time, the Jewish community was upset about at the school board about something. I'm assuming it was funding for private schools of some sort. And the Jewish community got together and said, we're going to the board meeting tonight, and every kid above whatever age it was, 9, 10, should come. So there are 250,000 Jews in Toronto. Okay, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
And the meeting was so full that the board room where they met was overflowing, and they created overflow in a massive room in the basement of whatever government offices this was. I was in the overflow. This was like very technologically advanced, where they actually had a video hookup. We're talking about like in 1990. So everybody was very impressed with this video hookup. And the parents were, the parents who had what to say and were put in the basement because there just wasn't room in the big room, were really upset. And I remember as a kid thinking, why are you yelling at the TV? The TV can't hear you. Apparently I was the only one who felt that way when I was 12 years old. Everybody else. So I remember being there, and I was trying to follow what was going on upstairs. And there were parents speaking, and there were board members speaking, and I don't even know who else was speaking. But the people in that room who were denied their voice were so frustrated. I mean, like, the level of tension and upset in that room was so tangible and almost scary to me as a kid. And I just, like I said, you can talk to the TV, it's not going to hear you. Those parents came prepared with something to say at the board meeting, and they were denied their voice. And I think it was purely for logistical reasons, if my memory serves me. Nobody said like, oh, you're that parent that's going to get really angry, we're putting you in the basement. It was just the first 100 people that came were upstairs, and the next like 500 were downstairs. But I think when you deny people a voice, particularly when it comes to their children, you get lots of tension and you get lots of high emotions. And when you make a statement that is, parents shouldn't have any say in this, or parents don't have any say in it, it's just like sticking them in the basement and you're lighting a match. So the tensions are so high already because people are frustrated that the school's not doing what they're doing or teaching their children the way that what they should teach, or we can disagree about curriculum and we can have a civil conversation about that. But as soon as you deny parents a voice in their children's education, ooh, that's not good. Because we're a bunch of mama bears. I don't know if we're soccer moms, but we're mama bears.
Very good. So let's use that term.
I like it better than soccer moms or domestic terrorists, personally, right? But I'm so overprotective of my children when it comes to everything. And I'm not a helicopter parent. I'm a parenting coach, and I believe in love and logic. And I'm not that crazy person, but we're built that way. God created us to be overprotective of our children, or our children will not survive infancy.
Tommy, let me ask you a question on that same point, because you stated it beautifully. Yes, let's use the mama bear rather than soccer mom. And I think you've hit the nub. When you deny people a voice for anything, then you're going to get frustration.
Yep.
Now, if we were in the Soviet Union, which thank God we're not, or Venezuela, thank God we're not, or Cuba, well, it's not going to matter because they've been denied a voice for generations. But this is America, where the idea of voice is part and parcel of our DNA. In other words, the ability to express. Now, you're Canadian, so you didn't get the full benefit of this, but you still had some tradition.
We're the same. We're just more civil.
or well, maybe we'll just in these days, the denial of voice is stronger in Canada even than here.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but in America, it is crossing a line, and I think it's a line, maybe even a gulf now, that is not enabling collaboration or civil discourse. And that's part of what we want to delve into in the next part of the questions. But I want to ask you, because you said so nice about denying voice, what do you sense, being a Virginian, about the upcoming election? Is it being talked about in regular conversations with people, or is it still, hey, it's just another election?
So it's an interesting thing. First, I want to say that I have not been following the election. That was a personal decision about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I said, I was listening to talk radio and podcasts, and I just said, this is not good for my psyche, my equilibrium. And I found myself stressed about things that weren't in my immediate needing of my immediate attention. I was like, if I'm going to stress about something, it's going to be something I actually can do something about. So I made a conscious decision to stop following as closely. In general, so I can't tell you really much about this election, but I'll tell you in general, Virginia's weird because where I live, which is Southern Virginia, this is South. We're not in the Hicks. We're in a city. It's one of the big cities in Virginia, but it is South, and we lean Republican. But up north in Northern Virginia, which is basically DC, Arlington and that area, that's very liberal. So people down here don't even consider them Virginians. Like those are liberals,
Oh.
So it's a very interesting thing. And the fact that, like you said, in the last 10, 15 years, Virginia has moved significantly to the left really reflects the fact that there are more and more people living outside DC in what's technically Virginia. They're working in DC for the most part, or they're part, their government, something in the government. They're not Navy. I live in a military town. We lean significantly to the right and just being in the South. So the frustration that I've heard since I moved here 20 years ago is, taxation without representation, really. It's just, that doesn't represent us, but there are more of them. And as more and more people move into the Northern Virginian cities and towns, that's what swayed the state. The people down here still feel strongly about the core values of being conservative. And, there's frustration, but I feel like, we don't feel like it's a battleground. Like it's a done deal. I mean, there are people obviously who are pushing and trying to get Youngkin in, but for the most part, it's like, oh yeah, it's just going to go blue.
Ooh, so there's almost a resignation that it will maintain.
Again, I can't tell you right now, but that's been the general feeling over the last little while. And again, there are people that are good friends of mine who are fighting for one side or the other, but they're definitely, there is a Republican base here that's pushing and trying to get out the vote for the Republican side. But I don't know how much hope people actually have.
So to me, it's fascinating. I want to avoid the Democrat versus Republican, which, by the way, it obviously is. But by the same token, it is, for what we're discussing, this almost, how should we say it, non-American process called, like you said, denial of voice, and specifically voicing an opinion that says you as parent do not have the right to have something to say over your child's education. In other words, to me, it's borders on the absurd. If Franz Kafka had wrote a little novel or published an article in the Wall Street Journal about it, you would say, well, he's crazy. He's Franz Kafka. But this is modern day America. And to have school boards, and we're not talking about just the one here in Loudoun County or Virginia or in let's say by the governors, you're seeing this in the major cities across the country. And as Lori mentioned, something called CRT, critical race theory, which positions people specifically against each other based upon a lack of or amount of melatonin or whatever in their skin. I mean, it's so bizarre that it makes us feel that something is amiss. There's something wrong with what's happening, and that there's an impossible bridge over this divide. So I'd like to just go to another piece that is specifically about the FBI situation, because here you have, and I find this, if somebody was writing a screenplay, it would be rejected out of hand because they call it too bizarre. So the person who was nominated or about to be nominated by then President Obama for Supreme Court position, but it was towards the end of his term, and he couldn't get it in, and the Senate said whatever. This head of the Senate was Republican, said we're going to table it, and then Trump got elected. So that person, Merrick Garland, was now appointed the Attorney General. So now we get to see what kind of person the Attorney General is. Did he have the temperament to be a Supreme Court justice? And it turns out that seemingly not. In other words, yes, partisan people are saying, yeah, right on, we love this. You're the Attorney General, and you're issuing a statement based upon no facts, by the way. Everybody agrees to that. But stories, news stories about this process of people at school board members feeling that they're potentially under attack. And the Attorney General of the United States is using his time and effort and his good offices to look at parents who are protesting, or at least saying, I want to have a voice in my child's education. And it looks as if we are in not just a topsy-turvy world, that there's something wrong. So I'm just going to tell everybody here, again, we thank God we have thousands of listeners, patient listeners. And in today's Wall Street Journal, I would hold it up. You don't want to see it. But the point is, in the opinion section of today's Wall Street Journal, talk about how au courant we are and how right on. And the middle part of the opinion piece says, about those terrorist parents, Merrick Garland should rescind his misguided school board's memo. And it goes on with a small, maybe 200 words of why it was completely inappropriate, wrong, incorrect, and may cause true lasting damage to the American process. Because what has happened, the Biden administration urged the Department of Justice to take action against people who were in the basement, Jaime, and said, yeah, they're yelling at the television. What's going on? So I want to move to another piece in this, again, bizarre opera, which nobody would ever publish because it's just too bizarre, and ask, we'll start with you, wonderful Lori.
Me?
When you hear, by the way, I want to give you a little historic background. Interesting enough, very few people know this. That's why I'm going to bring it out. Public education in the United States of America is relatively new. It's about 130 years plus minus. Let's call it 1900, just as to take a stab. I mean, there were schools before, of course, but public education as a process of indoctrination, let's be blunt, into the American way of life began in the early 1900s, and it was done with forethought by certain schools of thought, and it was done, you ready for this, Lori and Maura? Anti-Catholic.
Wow.
American public education was started anti-Catholic because there was a huge wave of immigration from Italy, from France, from Poland, of Catholics in America from the 1880s through the early 1900s that threatened, they thought, the American system, and certain liberal, we'll call them lefties today, came up with this process of American public education where we can bring kids into the classroom, yes, teach them American values, but not Catholic values, because it was seen that Catholics were, how should we say it, papists. Remember that one? You know, That doesn't mean you're a paper person. It means you follow the Pope. They were papists, and they weren't loyal to America. So public education was founded upon this process of indoctrination, of education, and doing it in such a way that taught values that were at least consistent with a home life that people could understand, even people who are Catholic, as long as they didn't go against totally Catholic teaching. So public education started out as an opposition party, as it were. So what's happening now in the true tradition of public education, it's now morphing itself and saying, well, we know best, we meaning educators, and I'm going to give you the name of somebody in a moment, who say this idea that you had of the Parent Teachers Association, well, that was a big myth. It's really the Teachers Association. And the reason is because, just like in anything in politics, it's all about money. It's all funding. Like you said, Tommy, funding for, let's say, private schools coming out of the public purse, well, that needs to have a discussion. Funding for public education is one of the largest parts of the United States government on every level, federal, state, and local. And when you have teachers who now number in the hundreds of thousands forming a union, it's called the Teachers Union, not the Parent Teachers Union, and not the Kids Teachers Union, or not that we care about Kids Union, it's the Teachers Union. Now, maybe great ideals. We want to make sure that teachers have the right amount of pay and the respect and all these positive values. But the point is that the Teachers Union has gotten to the point where it says now, the head of the Teachers Union, her name is Randy Weingarten. And yesterday, was it yesterday or maybe this morning even, she retweeted an article that appears in the Washington Post by somebody named Jack Schneider. He's an American and a Canadian author. She retweeted something like the following: parents do not have a voice in children's education. I'm going to repeat myself because I want Lori and Maura and Hami to comment on this. This is the head of the Teachers Union. Hundreds of thousands of teachers, which I'm presuming rank and file the most dedicated, wonderful, loving, giving people in the world, or amongst them. And the head of the union makes a statement and retweets it and stands behind it. Parents do not have a voice in children's education. So in that wonderful lift-off, Lori, what say you?
Can I pass the torch? I got to think about that because that makes my skin crawl. To be honest with you, that makes my skin crawl. And I just need a moment to think.
Okay. Maura, what would you say about this?
So you're essentially saying we had three key figures echo the same sentiment, that parents with a voice no longer count when it comes to overseeing the education of their children. I want to step back for a moment because these issues get people so upset, but I think I'll come around again. Lauren made a really good comment earlier. She said it's like we ripped off the bandage or what did you say?
Right.
Tape. Okay. Here in America, we have a certain ethos. You know I grew up close to Ellis Island. Do you want to know how proud I was of our history, knowing that we were welcoming so many people in? Now, this is a curiosity. And again, ambassador of happiness. And I always look for the silver lining or something good that's coming out of it. We may have people who are creating tremendous flashpoints, upsetting parents that really do feel like mama bears, and even dads that really want to oversee the upbringing or the education of their children. There's going to be something happening in America, regardless of people's particular proclivities, let's say, where if they are told they don't have a voice concerning the rearing of their children, people from every background are going to have some kind of a backlash to this. They're going to want to have a voice. So I think that even though this is happening and it looks like it's alarming, I think what's going to happen as a result of it is that parents who were maybe asleep, maybe moving into default mode, maybe busy, leaving everything up to the experts, will say to themselves all of a sudden, wait a minute, I don't agree with all of this. And I should also say this. In the past, I didn't know this, Barry, that it was sent to us that our educational system was set up by the Protestants to be anti-popery. Interesting. But I knew that originally it was set up, everything is, as an agenda to prepare a future workforce for the Industrial Revolution. But
Right.
at the time, people need to hear this, whoever's listening. This is a fascinating thing. Back in the 1930s, before we even went into World War II, and while we were in the midst of the Depression, it was a big deal if people had an 8th grade public education. And if they did, they could all read and write and do math. Today, we have moved the focus of education from academics, the skill sets that allow people to think and compute and write and communicate and even learn on their own because they can read and can communicate, to something other than academics. And I think that that's where we hopefully are moving to a place in our future where all parents will say, I want my kids to be able to read and to write and to research and to reason and to calculate so they know how to pay their bills. I'm not necessarily looking for a school system to tell my child what they're going to think about social matters. Because, you know, we're losing a game here if our kids are graduating even from university and they can't write a letter or can't do a memo. So I think in the long run, as much as this is kind of upsetting, there's something in the American fabric and ethos where people are accustomed to a voice, and they're also accustomed to living around a lot of different people. So even when it comes to this critical race theory, I have too many friends who are Black. I can't buy into this. I have Black friends who don't like being told that they are permanent victims. So there's something, there may be an agenda at work right now to divide the American public, but I think Americans as a whole appreciate the fact that we've got a lot of variety here and we can tap into what makes us great rather than what divides us and hurts us as a community.
Thank you so much, Maura. I want to make mention of two things, and I may have misspoke or I may have misled you. So it wasn't that there were Protestants setting up these public education schools, anti-Catholic. It's actually a little bit worse. They were atheists.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they weren't so much Protestants. They were not God lovers. They were anti-God people, which, by the way, is part of the strain that is coming through today, because you have people that don't want to be told by the mass, because what do you know? You're not the experts. This is very important what you said. You said the expert. Well, I guess what's happening, not just the Band-Aid is off, but it's don't pay attention to that guy behind the curtain. Remember the Wizard of Oz? The experts, they're naked. What do they know? Because if the experts are educating kids, and I mean, we'll call them kids, but these kids are so sharp in many ways. The digital natives, I mean, they know stuff. They're very facile. And as long as they stay away from reading, writing, and reasoning and respect, and they get involved in the social morass, that's what it is, then that will cause confusion and it will not be beneficial, because it's a digital world, true. But you're either a victim or a victor. And we want to raise a generation or more of victors. In other words, victors work with each other, hand to hand to hand to hand. And it doesn't matter where you're from, who you're. Look, Colin Powell just died. I mean, talk about an example, a par example of somebody who grew up with a very minimal education in a public institution. He was bright enough to work hard, so he graduated 8th grade. He went to high school, and he applied to different colleges. He couldn't go to a private college or even a public college then because it costs money. But there used to be schools in New York City. I mean, it's so hard to think about this that it doesn't even compute. CCNY, Community College of New York, free free. When all the lefties, the crazies today want, hey, we want free education. It was free. You ruined it. That's all. Because you kept giving money, get people to take out loans. That's called heroin. I mean, that's an addiction. You get people to take out a loan to go to college. So Colin Powell was the American dream. He succeeded. It didn't matter who. Yeah, of course. Did he face stuff in Southern Virginia or in Southern Georgia? He said, you're right. In the South in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't easy or pleasant for a black man or a black woman, for a Jew. I mean, we know this. People died. Hello. But we're in a position today where I think you're right, Maura. Well, the whole point of the marriage webinar is about what's the good news? Well, the good news is that right today, it's double the amount of people who are homeschooling than it was 10 years ago. Okay. The good news is that the sleeping giant has been awakened. And parents are saying, what do you mean I'm not part of my kid's education? Who are you? You were elected by me. We vote for the board members. So Hami, I want to turn it over to you because you have an interesting situation. Hami runs with her husband a private school, a parochial school, not Catholic, Jewish. But in other words, parents, I believe, I'm going to make the statement, they have a voice in what their children are learning, but the voice is somewhat uniform because people send the kids to school out of choice. In other words, choose a pun. It's school choice, even though it's very expensive. They don't get a voucher, but they go to your school out of choice because they've chosen to buy into the curriculum which they know. Is that correct?
To an extent, but I first want to say I don't run the school. My husband and I run the synagogue.
Oh, the synagogue, right.
The school is not technically affiliated with the synagogue. So I'm a parent in the school, and I was a teacher up until June, and I'm now not teaching in my children's school anymore. But there's definitely more. I don't know if there's more say in it. There's just, I chose the school based on what they teach, which somebody who's sending to public school doesn't have that ability to do. So although one could argue they do have that ability, they could take their kid out of public school and put them in private school. And I think as that happened more and more, where people of different religious persuasions are sending their children to religious schools, and even people, upper class people for the most part, can afford to send their kids to private schools where the agenda might be liberal, might be conservative, might not be an agenda, but again, they choose it based on its curriculum and on its outlook. What you're left with is that the people who are sending to public school are getting a much narrower education and a much narrower slice of America than was intended. If everybody went to public school, the public schools would reflect the population. But since so many of us choose not to send their children to public school for whatever the reason is, I don't think the student body in a public school is an accurate representation of America. That makes sense?
That's brilliant insight. Because again, let's be blunt. I'm 72, so I'm out of it. I have grandchildren, but they're 4.5 and 1.5. So it's school, but it's not. It's really daycare type of situation. So I don't really know, but I think I understand more what you're saying. And this is an interesting dilemma, actually.
And I even wonder if I want to push back a little bit, but I'm just learning the history from you right now. But as you were talking about how public schools were created in an anti-Catholic way, as a Jew who's heard stories about how there were, the only education was religious Christian education in America before there was religious Jewish education, I would have voted for that. Get the Catholics out of the public schools. If the public schools are going to be public schools, there should be no religion in public school. Not my religion, not your religion. With the greatest respect to the Catholic women on this panel. So I don't know if it's anti-Catholic or anti-religion. I wonder if it was more, let's keep religion out of the public sphere, which I believe in.
Well, that's an aspect. That was sort of, that was the public face. In other words, we could all buy into the fact that we want to keep, what do we call it, religion and state separate. That's the anti-disestablishment Presbyterian clause. We don't have an established religion. So that was the reason given. But the base understanding was it was done. I'll tell another historic story, which I think you'll appreciate, Tommy. I think you know it. So for good or ill, Israel in its earliest days was a very left-leaning, socialist, quasi-communist country in the late 30s, early 40s, and when the state was declared by the United Nations in 1948, it was very much populated by idealist communists. So much so that these places called kibbutzim, which are, you read about them in novels and you see in movies, and they're glorified as these wonderful places of peace and harmony and joy and happiness. Well, they were so crazy, the really religious ones, the pious communists, that when children were born, they did not live in their parents' home.
Say that again.
Kids were raised in a communal atmosphere. In other words, your child was your child, but your child was part of the community. So that kids were raised. Now you're not talking thousands, but you're talking in some of these where you had several hundred kids. They were raised in a communal environment. They know who the parents were and such. Of course, they were happy to see them, but you were not to have preferential treatment to your child. All children are wonderful. In other words, the ideal was great. Now, it fell apart after a generation because it's not human nature. You know, Mama Bear did take over after a bit, and because there were some kibbutzim that were not fully communist, and they saw the other ones flourishing more, you know, hey, that looks good. I think I like that idea of living better instead of living, you know, with a piece of bread and a salt and a little bit of water. I want to have some food. So people gave it up. But the point is, people that are unfortunately in the vanguard today, I mean, this because we're not talking about everybody in the Democratic Party. There are people in the vanguard that have a voice that is so loud that it virtually denies voice, to use your term. Who was that? That was you, Tommy. That it denies other people a voice because they're so vocal. They're not, and they're trying to squash. I mean, this cancel culture, we'll talk about another show, but the idea of speaking so loudly, and I can't hear what you're saying because you're talking too loud, you know, that kind of idea. But when you're in the vanguard and you're in the political, how should we say, you almost have a mandate, even though you don't, because it's on the edge. But that is what's driving the left agenda today. So it's really an idea trying to become an ideal and saying we are the righteous ones. And you're right, Tommy. Unfortunately, schools do not reflect the American, certainly the American political body. So, Lori, if your skin stops crawling, are you ready to share with us?
Yeah. So it's still, I just before I redo this thing, I got a ticket a couple days ago and it wasn't my fault. And I got a ticket. And the bottom line is, I'm going to have a voice. I was angry in the moment, but there is going to be, it's on the ticket. I have a chance to speak. And when I get that chance, I'm going to take it because that's how our system is set up. It's on my ticket. Yes, he gave me a ticket, but there's a process. And I like that. Even though in the moment I'm like, there's something I can do, but I know I'm going to have a chance to later. So, but what I am an advocate of voices. In my family, my children all have a chance to speak. If they don't agree with something, I want to hear what they think and feel, because I'll always take that into consideration. In this house, we run it differently. They don't really have a voice that they can change things, but that's how it works in the world too. But what I think is happening right now, parents don't have a voice on schools. They don't have a voice on IDs for voting. They don't have a voice on this vaccine mandate. They don't have a voice on the mask mandate. We are losing our voices. And what I think it's doing is other things are falling apart. Marriages are falling apart. Relationships are falling apart because of COVID. It's so hard to get to see people and try to connect to each other. And as humans, We need to be together. We need to hug and see each other as friends and as family. We need that. And we're losing that. And when you give that away, or when it can't happen, you are starving. And children are committing suicides, adults are committing suicide. It's getting worse and worse. And the more people take from us, the more we're like scrapping for air. Like, where do and people start spinning. And that's creating chaos, in my opinion. So that's my thoughts.
You said some wonderful things. I want to first of all give you applause and hope. I got a ticket many years ago in California, and I went to court when the time came, and the policeman gave his presentation. I gave my presentation, and the judge actually considered it, and she said, "Mr. Shaw, you're right."
That the American way.
Yeah,
Right?
what I'm saying, what we're doing right now, by the way, we have thousands of people around the world who are applauding each one of you. I want to let you know that, because this has been such a stimulating, wonderful conversation. I'm elated, but I just want to let you know, Lloyd, that what you just said, articulated, was exactly that. Yes, it goes to the vaccine mandate, the mask mandate, the squelching of the voice, and the gasping and the grasping for air and being starved, because that's not us. And you're right. I think it has been that we've been complacent, which happens, by the way, when you get fat in the sense that things are so easy. There's so much. And Kami, you said something really beautiful, that you were sort of plugged into certain podcasts and listening, and it was interesting and stimulating. Then you realized, wait a minute, I'm getting involved in things that I have very little to have, and I have no control over. I can't even get my arms around it. And why should I put my time and effort, my soul, into that when I have things that really matter to me that I want to do? And I can relate purposely. I got to tell you a fun story. My wife's not here. I'll tell you anyway. So my wife, when we were in California, we just moved 144 days ago. And she had a magnificent garden in front of our house. I mean, magnificent. Roses that people would walk by the house and they snip roses, and they leave a quarter or 50 cents on the post. It's just because they couldn't resist. It was just too good. And people, sometimes they had tours of something called, we lived in Venice, so they had bus tours of architecture in Venice. They came by to see my wife's garden. Why am I telling you? Because when she was in the garden, and this goes back 14, 15 years ago. So she had one of these headsets that you can listen to stuff. And she was a talk radio junkie. I mean, mainline. She couldn't get enough of that pure stuff. And from morning until late afternoon, when she was out in the garden or just doing it, she just was there. And she could tell me who the host was when talking about it. I found it. I like that stuff, but I don't like it that much. I love my wife, and I tried to ask her to stop. But hey, you're all married. It's hard for a spouse to do anything other than maybe, would you? And then one day, she went cold turkey. Like you said, Kami. She said, "Why do I want to do this?" And she has not been listening. Now it must be 8 years, 9 years. She doesn't even know what's going on sometimes when I mention to her about this and that, because I read the Wall Street Journal every day. It's so interesting when you begin to embrace that which matters most. And in this case, I want to go back to our premise. Our children, mama bear syndrome, not syndrome, mama bear, papa bear, our children matter most to us. And they do, not just because they come from our loins, but because we recognize they are an extension of everything that we hold dear in life. And those are values. Those make a difference. The values that we, God willing, demonstrate by modeling and by advocating are really the values that are going to allow this country, which has been the greatest force for good in the history of the world as a country, to continue. And so without us being involved and making the declaration, no matter what the head of the teachers union says, or the governor, or the governor, potential governor says that you're not involved. And that's called sneezing on the truth. You ever hear that? That's called sneezing on the truth.
Give me 2 minutes.
Okay,
thanks, honey.
Values,
I'm on the phone. I'll be right down.
Values that matter. And we are the ones to impart values to our children. And that's what education is about. Education is much less about reading, writing, arithmetic, reason, fundamental. But values are the reason that they are in any kind of process of becoming acculturated, the ability to live together in harmony with other people, listen to someone else, not prejudge, and be willing to learn. Willing to learn. How many I know is involved in family counseling? Lori, family counseling. Maura has done family counseling for herself and other people. I need counseling. I mean, the important thing of life is that values are the key. Parents have not just a right, but an obligation to be involved in our children's education. So I want to say again, our time is going. How much I appreciate each one of you, Lori, Maura, Tommy, what you bring, what you do, and God willing, we'll do this again in another month, and we may probably stay on the same topic because it's au courant, it's bubbling, and it's not going away so fast. And we'll talk about what happened after the election in Virginia, and there's an election in New Jersey. But these things make a difference. We make a difference. So I'm going to do two things. Number one, I'm going to do a group hug as we usually do. And hug, of course, stands for heartfelt, unlimited giving. Heartfelt, unlimited giving. And then we'll give a blessing to everybody as we leave. So you ready, everybody? On the count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Are we all hugging? Group hug.
Heartfelt, unlimited giving. And our blessing to all of you is go forth, live exuberantly, spread the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Go mad. Go make a difference.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joy of Living podcast. Now that's another step towards your healthier, happier, and wealthier life. Never hesitate to do good in the world, no matter what the situation. Join us for another upbeat discussion next time at barryshore.com. And be sure to leave a rating and subscribe to the show to get more conversations like this. And remember to share it with your family and friends too. See you on the next episode.